So, the Grid franchise, a roller coaster of a game series, turning heads and making waves back in 2008, but having a widely varied response about it throughout the later years. With each game being distinctively different, it has never been possible to nail down what Grid is really trying to achieve. Born from the ashes of the Race Driver series, which replaced the Toka series with the Race Driver Grid, later rebranded just as Grid, which only became more confusing in 2019, starting off a new era of racing games made by Codemasters. I've spent zillions of hours throughout the years playing the original Grid, but have never truly liked any of the sequels. Grid 2 shocked and even enraged me back in 2013, and Grid Autosport felt just pathetic. At some point I decided to do some introspective analysis. I got all of the games on my system and did a back-to-back analysis to find out if I was missing something. And since plenty of time had passed, I was able to look at everything in retrospect and just look at the facts. Now, the Grid reboot, or Grid 2019, has been added to the list, meant to restart the franchise. But has it? We'll find out soon enough. In this comparison, I'll be covering several main aspects about each game: the presentation, menu, UI, the career and how does the progression work, the gameplay and the driving physics, the AI, audio and sounds, and of course, graphics and the damage model. Since, as I already mentioned, I've spent a lot of time playing the original Grid, I will not be able to avoid certain bias. But that should be understandable. So let's do a time warp and go back to what I had to say back in 2016 and my present self covering the newest entry in the Grid series with fresh conclusions about the entire franchise. So, Race Driver Grid, or lately just Grid, is a racing game that served as a transition game from the Race Driver name to the Grid name for the series. At the beginning it had both titles in its name, so people would know what they could expect, but the Race Driver part was dropped later down the line. Released in 2008, the game was a huge success and won the BAFTA award in early 2009. This was the first game that I know that would use the flashback system, which would let you rewind a small portion of time to save yourself from a hard or even a fatal crash, and let you continue your race by cheating time. I quickly started to spot this feature in games made by other developers and in almost all the rest of Codemasters games. Funny thing is that the flashback is mentioned only once as a tutorial when you crash for the first time. After that, it's up to you to use it or not. I almost finished the game completely without it the first time because I had forgotten about how it works. It was also the first time I heard the term simcade. The term generally applies to racing games whose driving mechanics and physics feel authentic to real racing, yet still being easy enough to play and appeal to a wider audience by not being a true-to-life simulation. The presentation of the game looks very clean and easy to get used to. The menu is responsive, and there isn't an oversaturation of transitional animations that would waste your time for no reason. If you want to go for a quick race, here you go. If you want to continue your career, choose an event and show them what you're made of. That easy. The goal for you in the Grid career is to do two things: to reach the number 1 spots for you and your team. You do this in two ways: by earning money and by earning experience. These two do not have a linear progression mechanism. By earning a lot of money, you may not earn a lot of experience, and vice versa. The career starts with you being a nobody and in need to get your first car ready. To earn the cash, you need to be a driver for other teams and work for other people for a little while. When your car is ready, your team is launched into the competition and you are on your own. The cool thing is that later on, at any time, you can switch between racing for your own team or racing for others. You don't have any real initiative to do that most of the time, but it's a great feature to have. During your time becoming the best, you manage your sponsors and see what deals are the best for you. You have to buy all of the vehicles you want to drive and sometimes even manage your cash, because the higher tier vehicles do require quite a bit of it. Also, you will manage your teammate. He is also a crucial part for your team to become the best, because you cannot do it on your own, and you will have to replace a few teammates from time to time. This game is a mixture of racing and team management, which makes it feel more alive and rewarding. The driving physics are well balanced, with you spinning your wheels like crazy when on high RPMs, especially in first two gears, and the cars going out of control if you don't balance how much throttle you are using. Because playing this game with a keyboard for the first year, this game taught me how to quickly tap the acceleration throttle key to balance this. Driving the cars feels authentic. It certainly isn't a simulator, that's for sure, but the game has an understanding about how cars handle in general. You can take turns with the car being very steady yet still in high speed, or you can give it a little more power in turns and go for a power slide, which often enough lets you do amazing kind of overtaking after mastering it. Hard braking creates a lot of understeer, and the use of handbrake is just magical. The handbrake is very responsive, yet isn't acting crazy, like in some sort of a burnout game where you do a 180-degree spin when driving in 250 kilometers and stop instantly. With all of this combined, my playing style was a mixture of disciplined racing and the street punk power slider making cool moves. The feel of speed is amazing, regardless of whether you are in a street circuit or in Le Mans. You feel that you are going fast. There are two things that Grid is lacking, and it feels like half of the tracks would benefit from this. There aren't really any rules, and there are no pit stops. You can drive like a complete crazy person with no consequences, so all discussions about simulation falls out of the window. The street-type tracks would just be casual, tight racing modes, but official large-scale tracks lack depth when there are no pit stops. The AI is consistent enough, driving quite disciplined and on higher difficulty levels, creating a great challenge. They are, though, guilty acting sluggish at times when driving in a pack, and braking too much in those instances. But often enough, you have difficulties passing that pack anyway, and you are still left behind. It even has random crash and accident events happening to them, creating a great event variety in races, because you never know. A major exception of the AI standards are the drift events. My oh my! The only discipline where I can crank everything up to the maximum is the drift events, because even on the highest difficulty I can outperform the second place by my score being as much as 5 times as high, which is not competitive at all. Luckily, drift takes up around 5% of the whole game. The graphics are amazing for its time. It is 2016 and the game is 8 years old. Though graphics not being tipped up by today's standards, they certainly do hold up. And after hearing the lackings in later games, you will realize by how much. The main criticism would be that the overall visual filter seems a little muddy and lifeless. There are mods that help this, but the base graphics are great, though having a moody visual filter, similarly to how Grand Theft Auto 4 was. The game has a day and night races, and in Le Mans, you experience a live transition between day, night, and back to day lighting. There are hundreds of live people in the crowd reacting to some of the things that you do, for example, crash in a wall. Most of the cars have a unique in-car interface or cockpit. They paid a lot of attention to detail, and the dashboards that do not consist of a single digital screen look amazing. The damage model is one of the best I've ever seen up to this day. It sometimes seems like there's unlimited ways to destroy a vehicle, and in some situations, when watching a slow motion replay, you can even see the car bending in as it hits the wall. The audio in general is good, but there are also elements that are way off. Even though most of the cars have unique sounds, some cars have an annoying engine sound. One that is not even trying to imitate what would it sound like in real life, making me impossible to drive them. Nissan 350Z is one of the guilty ones. Even though the sound changes when you enter the cockpit view, it sounds like there's way too much reverb applied to all of it, and it sounds too spacey and spread it out. There are also live commentators to some of the drift events that are not muted even when you have the speech slider in the audio settings turned down, and they tend to be a little more annoying. The crowd also reacts to your actions in the sound department with cheering to high-octane actions and booing you if you aren't doing anything. Your team manager is also providing you with useful live info during races. Grid 2 came out 5 years after the original. After the massive success of the first game, there was a lot of hype around what the next game would be like. Before the release, there were already plenty of information lying around about what to expect. Grid 2 turned out to be a success for very casual players, but a disaster for many die-hard fans of the original, like myself. So what went wrong? Let's try to find out. Grid 2 is also a racing game about being the best, although the career structure has been completely reworked. Instead of gaining experience, you generated fans, and the game introduced this YouTube-like visual presentation. More fans meant more notoriety. but it did not create a true understanding about the meaning of the fans. Also, the money aspect was removed. You no longer buy your vehicles, you can choose whatever kind of vehicle for the event, and it is just given to you, which seems more like a quick race mode blended together with their career with no cost whatsoever. The sponsors are still present with your ability to choose the best deals for you, but they don't bring you money, they bring you fans. Fans are now a unified currency, having properties of both XP and money, but for no good reason. When talking about the presentation, Grid 2 is heavily based on split-up menu sections, accompanied by 2 long transitions that take up time. It has options that are separated and takes longer to access, and the transitions just adds for the weight. The driving physics are completely different. All driving assists have been removed, with the developer saying that all the cars handle differently, and the player would need to get the grips of each and single one, with no driving aids. I disagree. The driving mechanics are more similar to something that Need for Speed would have in their games of the last 6 to 7 years. The cars seem like driving on a slippery surface all the time. They are extremely loose and slide out very often, even without any handbrake. The initiated power slides feel more fake and do not require any particular effort to control them. Even though some cars are mentioned to be sliding a lot, because of them being a rear-wheel drive, the drivetrain does not have a huge impact on the car's handling. It is quite unified, and you will be doing unintentional power slides again, and again, and again. When it comes to race modes, many of them are back from the original, with a few new ones. Some do not make sense though. There are some events that are purely made for you to show off your overtaking skills of slower vehicles, and it is purely for generating more fans. The idea of the fans is so blindingly over this game, it is impossible to not compare it to some cheesy Need for Speed quotes about generating buzz around you.
Amazing. The buzz here is incredible, man. I couldn't keep track of the amount of camera phones focused on you.
There is a mode that is actually unique, and I play it from time to time, though I gave it a different name. I call it Driving Like a Prick Simulator. The mode originally makes you overtake as many slower driving Bigfoots as possible, creating overtaking combos and generating points for, exactly, getting more fans. It reminds me of all those mindless aggressive drivers we have in our streets, overtaking anyone they can, speeding up where possible and creating dozens of dangerous situations. This is the exact same thing. You are in a race with another car and you are overtaking a bunch of slower cars. When you imagine it like that, it is actually quite fun. The flashback is back and is also redone. Whereas in earlier games, when activating it, you pause the game and you are given a rewinding tool for precise rewinding. In Grid 2, you activate an automatically rewinding slider and you just need to tap the flashback again. It works really great as a fluid transition, but loses precision because of no possibility to rewind back and forth by yourself. But they had worked in an extremely annoying and immersion-breaking function, where the reminder for flashback shows every time the game detects something going wrong. You sliding out, you colliding with someone else, press this button for flashback. That is one of the worst things you could do. Another seemingly good thing that has been implemented, a penalty system. While on the surface it seems like a good thing, the implementation is another worst thing ever. The penalty system is quite primitive, corner cutting. I would not have any problem with that, but the way it's done just reeks of laziness. The game detects you cutting corners and does it quite well, but after doing so, you are automatically slowed down. The game takes away your control for your vehicle for X amount of time. You cannot speed up at all. It is a lazy way to not give you an actual time penalty of 3 seconds, for example. That is all I'm going to say about it, because anything else would turn into a rant. The AI will give you a challenge. That's an official statement from the devs. I am now using more quotes from the developers since the last 2 games came out in an era where developers were much more actively communicating with their audience, and often enough, saying improper things. The AI is not simply challenging, it is unfair. If the first race seems like a piece of cake, in the second one going in a medium difficulty I did not find a chance to pass most of the cars, since the track was very short and my car was slippery sliding most of the time. Many things started to seem are not working together anymore. It is positive that the AI still has random crash events and are not reacting in a monotone way, but the difficulty seems to be acting randomly and they tend to be too hard to keep up with, especially when a race is short. The graphics though are much better. Overall, the base visual fidelity is very good and Codemasters did a great job on optimizing the game as well. At the time I was playing it on my old toaster PC and it handled it quite well. But it's not just about the graphics, is it? I talked about the immersion-breaking flashback button appearing every 30 seconds, and now I have finally reached the biggest outcry that the Grid 2 had, which was the biggest immersion breaker for many people, myself included. No cockpit camera. The official statement was that only around 5% of players are using the in-car camera for the Codemasters games, which as far as I've read has not been backed up by any reliable statistics or an actual method of how they actually know that. My favorite camera and the greatest immersion element was removed, so I used the closest I could, the bonnet camera. It helped only partly. I am using a steering wheel, pedals and a shifter. Of course I want to feel like I'm sitting inside a vehicle. The damage model is still good, but seems like it has been nerfed. The cars look amazing and seeing their bodies bent looks very good, but the amount of detail falling off and the ability to bend your car as 5 years prior to this seems worse and looks much more stiff. I again will be making a comparison to Grand Theft Auto. It feels similarly to how GTA 5's damage model is nerfed compared to GTA 4. Codemasters are actually masters of doing great damage visuals, but have not surprised me in a good way for a long time. The sound has been improved, with the car engine sounds being higher quality than before, though the overall sound design sometimes seems too saturated with the crowd, plenty of cars, engines, crashes, tire screeching and even your manager-ish guy talking over everything, and all of this combined being too much. And since there is no in-car camera that potentially would dampen the outside noises, it is also too spacey as in the first game. At least there are settings you can adjust for the audio to make it better for yourself. You no longer have a proper team manager communicating to you, rather some young dude who is trying to sound cool but failing due to delivering some pretty terrible advice.
To win an overtake, you need to overtake. Simple, right?
Grid Autosport was released extremely quickly after Grid 2, only 13 months later. They had redone plenty of things again, but left some of the problems from Grid 2 present. This game was presented as a true authentic driving experience, and I want you to remember this word. Authentic. The developer really stuffed it in as much as possible with nothing to back it up. The idea behind Grid Autosport is to race for other teams. Yep, the better you do, the better events you get, but you do not have a personality of your own. You are a hired driver for other teams, and you have to reach the finest events while driving for others. The XP system is back, and you earn it to see how well you do, and you earn XP for each kind of racing events separately. Money is still missing, and you have no cash to spend. The presentation and the menus is a bit cleaner compared to Grid 2. There are still minor time-taking transitions for each menu section you browse, but generally it is decently functional. Grabbing a quick race is not a problem. There are plenty of options to change, and off you go. The same cannot be said about the career mode. The career mode consists of you choosing what class of vehicles you are going to be racing and then picking out the best deal for you. The deals differ in XP and the cars you will be driving. Very often, one event consists of several races with different cars, and you either take the cars presented to you or pick something else. It is so limited, it is maddening. There are too many intro movies trying to convince you how amazing the experience of Grid Autosport is and what it is about, and it takes too much time listening to this woman explaining it to you. It doesn't seem very authentic if you need to try so hard to convince me. Or maybe you think that the players would not be able to figure stuff out or have as much fun if you don't tell them it is. The gameplay feels stiffer than Grid 2. It would seem natural that if people are complaining about every single vehicle being too drifty, that the issue would get addressed. Though, it still feels off. For a racing game, the majority of time should be spent at refining the driving physics. So Autosport has stiffer handling, though essentially you do not feel your vehicle at all. They have kind of tried to make it a hybrid between the first two games, because as far as I understand, in 13 months, they could not create a completely new driving model. I may be wrong though. So they took what Grid 2 had and reworked that. There is a huge disconnection with the actual speed and what you see on the screen. You do not feel your vehicle's grip at all. The only way I could feel any connection to the vehicles and the road and drive in this game was with my G27. The usage of the shifter helped to feel the cars a little bit more, since I was the one shifting gears, but even the force feedback still could not completely save the rushed physics and disconnection to the road. The flashback is still here, and they also have not removed the speed slowdown penalty for cutting corners. I mean, come on people, are you serious? This is so authentic that if I break the rules, my control over the vehicle is taken away. Unfortunately, I have to repeat myself. Time penalties. You have a teammate in each race and you can tell them how to manage their positions, to try and take over or to defend. I found this to be completely useless and still work as random as it possibly can. When I said defend, most of the time they lost their positions almost immediately. The AI is something. I had trouble feeling my vehicle, and on top of that, the AI is pretty challenging. If you manage to memorize how your car drives, then do not confuse that with understanding how it drives, you can beat them. But the AI also has an issue that they crash into you randomly, which is a race breaker. That makes the AI bad in general. The graphics are slightly better than Grid 2, not much that can be said here. The crashing is still not as good as the very first game and it feels too stiff. Talking about authenticity, again. If Grid 2 had no cockpit camera because almost nobody was using them anyway, Autosport has a cockpit camera again, because I vaguely quote the developers that it was a no-brainer to include it in a game like this. Okay. With a major hiccup though, it is a blurry, dark dashboard, where you can barely distinguish the wheel from anything else. There are no actual dashboard elements or speedometer or anything. There is a mod that takes the blur away, and one of the dashboards I saw was a horribly rendered dashboard from an old Codemasters game. And all of this cost full price. It costs full price with the devs laughing straight in your face. The sound is good. The cars don't have an extremely unique engine sounds, but they get the job done. The sounds are a little more low profile, and if you are using the interior camera, there isn't as much noises blasting in your ears. Finally, 5 years after Grid Autosport, Grid 2019 had arrived. The game came out swinging, promising to reinvent the racing formula, promising to have an attitude, claiming it would reset expectations. All of the claims were combined under a single hashtag, like no other. Grid 2019 was very confident about its personality and content underneath. The game took itself very seriously. Unfortunately, this doesn't translate to the player. The Grid reboot has red flags popping all over the place from the very beginning. Similar to other entries in the franchise, it starts up with an intro movie. This isn't simply the longest intro of all Grid games. The introductory part of Grid 2019 takes at least 12 minutes to go through, and that's without adjusting the settings to your preference. Right after you calibrate your brightness, it goes straight into a cutscene. If you have seen the trailer prior to playing the game, you will notice that you're essentially watching the trailer for Grid 2019 once again. You're watching a trailer for something that you already have in your possession, and as usual, it cannot be skipped. I went through this experience for this video again, and knowing what I would have to go through, I had Spotify playing complete nonsense in the background to make this intro just a little bit more exciting. Same as with previous entries, it gets followed up by an introductory race. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. The race transitions into further cutscenes, where you also get the taste of the two commenters, Kristen and Alex, that are going to be accompanying you throughout your entire Grid 2019 experience.
With that wrapped up, it's over to Indianapolis.
And Kristen, it's gotta be the one to watch.
Yeah, you won't want to miss it, Alex. The Grid World Series is so close you can touch it. I reckon there's going to be a ball out there to make it through.
So the first race transitions into another cutscene, that transitions into another race, which gets followed up by a third cutscene and a third introductory race. And of course, as all good games with thoughtful mechanics, you have to adjust your settings during these races. You get your first chance to set up your bindings, wheel adjustments, UI preferences, graphics, sound settings, when you're already behind the wheel. Up until now, you still haven't seen the menu. To be fair, Grid 2019 isn't the only game that does this, but it's the only game in the series that takes on average 15 minutes doing it. If you're looking for a serious racing game and don't see any value in visual flair, you might start noticing the continuous festival-like visuals during finishes. For some reason, each finish in Grid 2019 gets accompanied with fireworks, colored gases, and confetti. And it doesn't matter if you're finishing 1st, 2nd, 13th, or are simply doing qualifying runs. These visuals are not there for the best player in the race, but for the human player, regardless of the position you're in. This is how the player is greeted when starting the game for the first time. After you're done with the unskippable intro, you're finally thrown into the menu. And I do mean, thrown into the menu. After this point, nothing is explained to you anymore. To be honest, nothing gets explained to you prior to this as well. Every single word coming out of the mouths of Kristen and Alex is filler. Grid 2019 is also missing the pop-up window where you would name your player, select the difficulty prior to jumping in the races, setting up your drive avatar, so to speak. During my very first experience with this game, only after several hours I noticed that I was called Player 1. My team was called My Team. Grid 2019 never offers you the option to change these. It's a complete wasteland. You scramble to find the features buried in the game and it doesn't feel welcoming to the player at all. The menu and presentation is bad. It's all around bad. This is your career, and it isn't really the whole career at the same time. I usually think twice before calling things lazy, but the way the career is handled in Grid 2019 is lazy. Every single window is squeezed into a single window. Of course, nothing is explained to the player. So, if this is the career, one would assume that there isn't any team management. Well, there is. For some reason, team management is located elsewhere under the player profile tab. Over there, you can manage your teammates, which doesn't feel rewarding or organic. If you aren't paying 110% attention in the introductory section, and I cannot blame you because it's extremely unfocused, filled with nonsense and all over the place, you will miss the fact that you already have a teammate assigned to you, and he's actually with you during those 3 races. You can replace him instantly when reaching the menu if you like. Unfortunately, everyone that isn't available is locked and clearly marked as the driver will get unlocked in level blah blah blah. Your vehicle garage can also be found here, and that's it. It's just the vehicle garage. For some reason, the career elements are scattered all over the place. With 1920x1080 or more pixels available, basic game elements are hidden after different tabs as if there wasn't enough room on screen. Though all of the career races could get squished into small tiny squares in a single window, doesn't really make sense. Money is back in Grid 2019, letting you buy vehicles if you can afford them. I promise you, I'm not nitpicking. Who decided that suddenly, where all of the actions in the menu can be achieved by pressing a key, buying a car requires you to hold the key? Check this out. You hold it, and you keep holding it, and you've instantly sold it. You've sold it for cheaper, and now you cannot afford it anymore. Hold it, hold, and just watch your funds burn. Watch your money disappear into the void. Unfortunately, there isn't much left to be said about the career. You choose a race in the vehicle class you prefer and do the races. Each race has a luckily skippable intro with Kristen and Alex talking about nothing. I cannot imagine anyone actually listening to these. What a waste of time and money by Codemasters hiring these people, making these cutscenes. And there's so many variations of them, a complete waste of resources.
Collecting on the track surface. So I'd want to avoid it, but if you couldn't, then you'd need to be super careful not to lose control, as it can play havoc with your grip.
And thank you, Kristen. Well, it's nearly time our drivers are having last-minute discussions with their team and getting prepared to head to their vehicles. We're heading into the final round now, where it'll all be decided. Kristen, tell me what's gonna happen.
Looks to be a really heated race ahead. We've seen some great racing, and the way the points are stacked, I can see a few potential winners out there. But who will snatch it? Can't wait to find out.
Well, we're about to see how this all plays out, so don't go anywhere.
At this point in time, Grid 2019 is still being updated, with Codemasters doing their new financial model called Seasons. After releasing the main game, they release additional content with more cars and events added. The access to Seasons can be gained with buying the premium edition for the game, or buying the seasons separately as they release. Seems like this is a somewhat universal model that Codemasters are doing now, since Dirt Rally 2.0 is doing the same thing. That's also the reason the comparison is called 2008 to 2020, because it's essentially Grid 2020 now. And by the game getting updated over time, one would hope that they would also fix some of the issues that they had when it launched initially. Let's see if that's the case. I'll give a hint. Nothing I've talked about up until now is any different than it was when the game came out. I'm fairly pleased with the driving. It's been half a year after I initially played Grid 2019, and I'm still fine with the driving model. It is also a topic I've realized is absolutely impossible to talk about objectively. If I complained about Grid Autosport making me feel like I'm in a boat, just floating in the ocean, not being able to feel the car, I've seen somebody saying the exact same thing about Grid 2019, which I disagree with strongly. I do feel some sort of resemblance of the original Grid 2008 driving mechanics. It's not the same thing, nor that it necessarily should be, but I get a similar feeling when driving the Plymouth Barracuda or the Nissan 350Z, for example, and I'm actually able to drive the 350Z now. Just listen to it. I would say that the driving model deserves some praise, because that is one of the strongest aspects about this game. It makes sense instantly, isn't too goofy or too much of a simulation, and that's with no assists on. The brief period of time I've played the game now, after its initial release, I did get some good moments out of it. The driving feels quite decent. The AI is fairly aggressive, and the AI model fits the driving mechanics fairly well. It reminds me of Grid Autosport's AI aggression, which has been boosted even further. They don't tolerate you doing nonsense and power sliding in front of them. If there's a car behind you and you decide to do suboptimal power sliding, they will push you away. And with the way you can feel the car, how the sound works, it does make sense. You understand that it's a proper reaction to your actions. They also have a random crash events, which is always nice. Overall, in some instances I can still apply the same driving techniques as in the original. Disciplined driving combined with the street punk power slider here and there. Grid 2019 also has a nemesis system, which is pointless to talk about. I see no value in it apart from being a marketing bullet point. You crash into the AI drivers hard enough, and they hate you. The penalty system. It only took 11 years to implement a penalty system that actually makes some sense. Corner cutting is still being registered, and finally, after god how many years, it doesn't take your control away. After the game registers you cutting corners, it applies a time penalty to your end result. Was it really that hard? And since the first half of this video is a copy-paste from the one I did in 2016, I also can predict some of the comments stupid people may have, saying, "Oh, it's not really taking your control away, it just doesn't allow you to accelerate." That's exactly what taking control away from the player means. Audio is pretty good overall, with the cars having good engine sounds, nothing seeming like it has bad audio quality, but still, eventually everything crumbles down. I don't like to use the word lazy, but this is going to be the second time already. All of the effects are combined under a single slider. That would include the engine noise, the tire screeching, ambience and effects. Everything, apart from the music and commentators. If you want to dampen one type of noise to emphasize on another, engine noise for example, as I like to do, it's impossible. At least you can completely mute the commenters, which totally changes the dynamic of pre-race cutscenes. How is lack of these sliders lazy, you might ask? Well, Dirt Rally 2.0 has the option to level the different sounds the way you prefer, and Dirt Rally 2.0 came out earlier in the same year.
Hey, Grid 2019, you see that?
And after around 6 months since its release, Grid 2019 is still missing such an option. Lazy. The graphics are fairly pleasing to look at, the game looks good and feels fairly well optimized in my experience. I can crank settings fairly high on my mid-tier setup and it still holds 60 plus FPS. Grid 2019 is a giant middle finger to Grid 2 and Grid Autosport in a sense that it has some good looking and detailed cockpit views. There's a large variety of them and they are very pleasing to the eye. At this point it makes me wonder, why? If almost nobody is using them, then whatever. But they didn't stop there. When you're using the rear view camera, it actually looks back inside the actual car. The rear view isn't an outside camera placed near the wing or completely away from the car. It's actually in it. The textures of the rear aren't maybe as high quality, but it doesn't really matter because the player would use the camera only briefly. Also a pretty cool element. The damage model is somewhat tricky to talk about. Overall, it's not nearly as aggressive as in the previous entries. Sometimes it feels like it's non-existent, where hard crashes have no effect on your car visuals, and the mechanical damage is also fairly weak. But Codemasters have actually done something else this time. The damage model is visually intricate. It is detailed in a different way. It actually applies to all the car visuals. I would say that they are using some visual trickery that gives the cars more depth visually. When looking at replays and paying attention to the wheels, to the tires, it does give a better sense of depth than ever before. Same applies to the damage. Even though the cars don't bend and the body doesn't fall apart nearly as aggressively as it used to, the way the body gets damaged is somehow more intricate. You get these tiny damaging elements, where you'll get a hole in your car's bumper and actually will get a sense that you're looking in it. And that left me wondering. It does feel like a step up, only on a smaller scale, but still leaves a sour taste in the mouth, because you won't be seeing it when using the cockpit view. Actually, bent bodies and missing doors leave a stronger impression. To be honest, I actually like these intricate damage additions, but they should be combined with the hardcore damage Codemasters introduced years ago, because on their own they have no chance to leave a great impression. Codemasters have actually dug a hole for themselves. They left such a strong impression with the original Grid and Dirt 2 having great damage models, cannot comment about Dirt 1 and 3. And now, Dirt Rally 2.0 also having amazing visual damage, with you being able to destroy your car. It has this weird effect that even when your chances to win are diminished or ruined completely, as a consolation you get this amazing visual damage to look at. Oh, I'm sorry. Where are my manners? I usually drive with the HUD turned off. Although, Grid 2019 doesn't respect your choice to have the HUD switched off. It will still pop the 3, 2, 1, go countdown in your face, as will the final lap announcement. It will also periodically pop up objectives on the screen that you've just reached. And if you're able to hear things really well, you will notice the sound for XP charging up in the background. You may have switched the HUD pop-up off in the settings, but the sound is still there. You can hear the XP gathering in the background because the audio levels are combined in a single slider. As I've mentioned already, each race finishes off with festival-worthy visuals. Fireworks, colored gases, confetti, and balloons in the beginning of the races. So that's the attitude, the marketing materials we're talking about, I guess. In between of my initial experience and the replay of Grid 2019, I tried out the Forza Horizon 4. That's where I feel Grid 2019 took the inspiration for these visual elements. Although, the difference between Forza and Grid is that all of the EDM elements, the lasers, rainbow colors, fireworks and stuff, is mostly located only around the actual Horizon Festival area. As you leave the area, you get beautiful landscapes, country and highway roads, artificial nature that pleases the eye. It doesn't shove fireworks in your face every chance it gets. And Forza Horizon is goofy all around. It doesn't take itself that seriously, but has a much more mature feeling than Grid 2019, that constantly shoots colored gases in your face. Maybe my assumption of Grid taking inspiration from Forza isn't correct, because Codemasters are known of having additional visual flair in their games. When initially playing Grid 2019 at its release, I couldn't find a way to turn this off. I even turned the graphics down to their lowest settings, and I was still getting these annoying visual additions. Now I'm not so sure anymore. It might be that the post-process slider is actually responsible for turning this off, though I'm not 100% sure. The couple of races I've done with post-process turned off seems like I'm not getting anything, but when you get this screen after the finish, you sometimes can still see fireworks in the background. And regardless of whether you see it or not, you can still hear it because all of the audio elements are combined under a single slider. Same as in the original Grid from 2008, your cars get dirty over time. Actually, no, that's not true. Your cars are constantly dirty. You will buy a dirty car, drive a dirty car, and live with a dirty car. Since the release of the game, Grid 2019 has actually received an update, which includes the ability to wash and respray your cars. Guess what? It doesn't work. It's fucking broken. Oh, Codemasters. Fuck! So that's the Grid franchise. My journey with these games is complete and I've actually gotten tired of talking about them. I've reached a state where I don't care. I just don't care anymore. Looking back at this franchise now, it feels like the original Grid was a complete coincidence. Codemasters got lucky that it turned out so good. They had no idea it would turn out so great and they probably weren't 100% sure what they were doing. Grid 2 has a stupid career model that was dead on arrival and hasn't improved its novelty value one bit over time. It's an out-of-touch approach with the YouTube theme. To be honest, the driving model in Grid 2 doesn't bother me. At least, not anymore. It's not a bad driving model in general. It's simply not a driving model that a grid game should have. I know there's a market for the intentionally power-slidey games, but that's not the grid identity. But what is the grid identity? A complete midlife crisis, it seems. If there's one game that I feel should have never existed at all, that's Grid Autosport. A crappy cash grab of a game with zero passion put into it and one of the worst driving models I've ever played. Authentic. Grid 2019 suffers mostly of wasted potential. It has love put into it in some aspects where others have been completely overlooked, bringing the good ones down. It can provide good racing experiences, which constantly get bogged down with filler, weird artistic choices, and subpar design elements. There's one particular comment I would like to reply to right away, one that has popped up from time to time, because some of the people are dumb. You don't like it because you suck at it. That's the dumbest type of comment one could write. If you actually gave a minute to think about it, you would realize that it makes no sense. I have no issue with being challenged and breaking a sweat in order to win. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense to master a particular game. I would respect you more if you had just called me a cunt. So that's the Grid franchise. Where will the future take us? I don't care anymore. I just don't care anymore. It might seem so obvious and easy what a good Grid game requires. Codemasters makes it look like that's not the case. But they also backtrack what they do and say all the time, so there's that.
When we went for the concept of this sort of motorsport feel, authentic motorsport, it was just it was a no-brainer really. We knew we had to be able to put the player in the driving seat and actually see the world through the eyes of a racing driver. So for us, yeah, it was an absolute requirement. In fact, we love it too here.